Zain stood as she entered, his gaze lingering on the gown she wore. The silk clung delicately to her figure, a stark contrast to her usual uniform. "You look extraordinary," he said, offering her a glass of wine. "I've always wondered what was beneath all those layers." Amara laughed awkwardly, trying to downplay the moment. "Mostly dirt and sweat, I'm afraid." But he only smiled, shaking his head. "You have no idea, do you? How rare you are. How beautiful." She tried to keep her guard up, reminding herself that he was her boss, that this wasn't normal. But the warmth in his voice, the tenderness in his eyes, it disarmed her. And when he reached across the table to take her hand, her heart didn't resist. The kiss came slowly, like a question they both didn't know how to ask. It was tentative, cautious, two people dipping their toes into forbidden waters. But the moment it deepened, it felt like something long overdue. A secret neither had the courage to say aloud until that night. When they finally pulled apart, Amara stepped back, breathless. "This is a mistake," she whispered. But Zain shook his head. "No, pretending we don't feel this. That was the mistake." Zain was a notoriously private billionaire who had vanished from the public eye after a highly publicized breakup with a glamorous socialite. Seeking isolation, he withdrew to one of his remote estates, far from the prying lenses of the media. He rarely spoke to anyone on the staff, especially not the new maid, a quiet, unassuming young woman named Amara. Her presence always seemed slightly out of sync with the lavish world she now inhabited. Amara had just finished cleaning one of the guest rooms when she noticed the sound of water running from the adjoining bathroom. Assuming someone had forgotten to turn it off and finding no one else around, she impulsively decided to rinse off the sweat she'd accumulated through a long morning of scrubbing. With a towel clutched in her hand, she stepped inside, not realizing the door hadn't been properly secured. Meanwhile, Zain, preoccupied with a phone call and searching for an important document he'd left in the same guest room, pushed the door open without a second thought. The sight that greeted him made him stop in his tracks. Amara, halfway undressed, eyes wide with panic, a towel clutched to her chest. Zain quickly turned away, stammering an apology before shutting the door behind him. His heart raced, not from shame, but from something deeper, more unsettling. That brief, unintentional glimpse stirred something within him. For the first time, he truly saw her. Not the maid, but the woman, soft, vulnerable, striking in a way he hadn't noticed before. Inside the bathroom, Amara sat on the cool tiles, utterly humiliated. She'd taken the job purely out of desperation, hoping to pay for her younger brother's medical treatments. Never had she imagined working for a man of such power, let alone being exposed like that in front of him. She considered quitting right then and there, certain she'd either be dismissed or humiliated further. But to her shock, the next day came and went without consequence. Zain didn't fire her. In fact, he barely looked at her. And when he did, his gaze was strangely soft. She couldn't decipher whether it was remorse, curiosity, or something else entirely. Zain, however, found himself watching her in ways he hadn't before. There was no makeup on her face, no elaborate hairstyles, no designer fragrance. She was simple, real, and though she tried her best to stay invisible, he couldn't help noticing her now, how she moved quietly, how she worked diligently, and how she never once tried to impress him. Amara, in turn, grew increasingly uneasy. Zain never behaved inappropriately, but his presence lingered. She could feel it every time she entered a room, could sense the weight of his eyes, even when her back was turned. It wasn't overt, but it was unmistakable. Something had changed. And then came the moment that confirmed it. It was late at night. Amara was scrubbing the kitchen floor, long after the rest of the staff had gone to bed. When she looked up, she saw Zain standing silently in the doorway. He wasn't looking at her hands or the floor. He was looking at her. "You should be sleeping," he said, stepping closer, his voice low and unexpectedly gentle. "Why are you still working?" Startled, Amara rose to her feet and quickly dried her hands on her apron. "I wanted to finish before morning," she said. "I'm sorry if I disturbed you." She kept her gaze averted, but she could feel his eyes roaming over her. The silence between them felt heavy with meaning. "I disturbed you yesterday," Zain said suddenly, "and I've been thinking about it. More than I should." Her heart skipped. She hadn't expected that level of honesty. "You're different," he continued. "You try to hide it, but I see it. You're not just a maid, are you?" The words made Amara freeze. She wasn't just a maid. And that secret, buried deep beneath layers of shame and survival, now threatened to rise to the surface. Zain couldn't stop thinking about her. That unexpected encounter had flipped a switch in his mind. He started finding excuses to be near Amara. Morning strolls through the kitchen, impromptu visits to the laundry room, lingering too long at the entryway to the staff quarters. His questions were casual: what she liked to drink, whether she preferred the sunrise or the moonlight, but his eyes always searched hers for something deeper. Amara, meanwhile, was walking a tightrope. She'd taken this job under false pretenses, carrying a past she hoped would never resurface. Zain's attention wasn't hostile, but it was unnerving. She kept her responses short and her head down, trying to convince herself that this wasn't dangerous, that she wasn't tempting fate by staying. But the tension between them refused to dissipate. One evening, as she scrubbed the hallway near the library, Amara accidentally knocked over a delicate crystal vase. It shattered instantly. She froze, heart hammering. This was it. She braced herself for Zain's wrath. Instead, he rushed to her side, not in anger, but concern. He didn't look at the shards. He took her trembling hands in his and asked, "Are you okay?" His touch, warm and reassuring, made her knees go weak. From that moment, rumors began circling the mansion. Staff whispered behind cupped hands. The quiet maid who never smiled was now seen speaking with the boss far too often. She was suddenly assigned lighter duties. She ate lunch later than the others, always summoned to his side for some new task. The change didn't go unnoticed, especially by Mariah, the senior housekeeper. Mariah had worked at the estate for years and made no secret of her ambition. To her, Amara was a threat, a mystery girl who had somehow stolen the attention Mariah had spent years trying to earn. Then one morning, Amara found her room in disarray. Her journal was splayed open on the bed, private thoughts exposed. A few of her clothes were missing. It wasn't a robbery, it was a warning. Shaken, Amara considered leaving. Her fingers hovered over her packed bag more than once. But something or someone kept her rooted. Zain. That evening, there was a knock at her door. She opened it to find him standing there, his brow furrowed. "Someone went through my things," she whispered, her voice raw. Zain's eyes darkened. "No one touches you again," he said quietly. "Not in my house." She looked up at him then, for the first time, not with fear, but something much closer to trust. From that point, Zain began shifting the lines between employer and employee. He asked her to handle personal tasks, his wardrobe, his study, his morning coffee. Tasks that no maid ever touched. The other staff noticed. The whispers grew louder. But Zain didn't seem to care. One afternoon, as Amara helped him fasten his cufflinks, her fingers brushed his wrist. They both froze. Their eyes met. The silence between them swelled. His body leaned forward slightly, but Amara stepped back and quickly left the room, heart racing. That night, she tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Not because she feared him, but because she didn't trust herself. She liked him. She wanted him. And that terrified her more than anything. Because if he ever found out who she really was, who she had been before the uniform, the fragile thing forming between them would shatter. Amara had once belonged to a world of privilege. But after her father's financial scandal destroyed their family name, she disappeared into anonymity. She'd lived in shelters, taken odd jobs, scrubbed floors, anything to survive. No one here knew, and she prayed it would stay that way. But Zain was perceptive. He asked too many questions, and when he invited her to a private dinner as a thank you, she knew this was no longer about kindness. "I'm your maid, sir," she said, trying to keep the distance. Zain's reply was soft but pointed, "Not in that dress." Later that night, she found a silk gown laid out neatly on her bed. The rules had changed. The dining room looked nothing like the one Amara had cleaned every morning. Tonight, it shimmered under the soft flicker of candles. A mellow saxophone melody hummed in the background. And at the center of the long mahogany table, 2 seats. Just 2. Zain stood as she entered, his gaze lingering on the gown she wore. The silk clung delicately to her figure, a stark contrast to her usual uniform. "You look extraordinary," he said, offering her a glass of wine. "I've always wondered what was beneath all those layers." Amara laughed awkwardly, trying to downplay the moment. "Mostly dirt and sweat, I'm afraid." But he only smiled, shaking his head. "You have no idea, do you? How rare you are. How beautiful." She tried to keep her guard up, reminding herself that he was her boss, that this wasn't normal. But the warmth in his voice, the tenderness in his eyes, it disarmed her. And when he reached across the table to take her hand, her heart didn't resist. The kiss came slowly, like a question they both didn't know how to ask. It was tentative, cautious, 2 people dipping their toes into forbidden waters. But the moment it deepened, it felt like something long overdue. A secret neither had the courage to say aloud until that night. When they finally pulled apart, Amara stepped back, breathless. "This is a mistake," she whispered. But Zain shook his head. "No, pretending we don't feel this. That was the mistake." The next morning, things were different. They didn't speak of the kiss, but the air between them had changed. Glances stretched a beat longer. Fingers brushed a little too often. He gave her access to his private library, a sanctuary no one else entered, and began calling her into his study just to talk. She noticed he'd stopped speaking in formalities. He said her name like it mattered. And then one evening, it all came crashing down. Mariah, the senior housekeeper, walked in on them standing far too close in the corridor, Amara's hand brushing Zain's chest, his expression soft, intimate. Mariah's eyes narrowed. That was the moment the storm began. Within days, rumors swirled through the mansion like wildfire. "She's seducing him. She's just a social climber. She won't last." Mariah whispered cruel stories to anyone who would listen, spinning narratives of manipulation and deception. The atmosphere in the estate shifted. Amara's cleaning supplies mysteriously vanished. Her meals arrived cold. Doors were found locked when she approached. Staff members stopped looking her in the eye. Zain noticed. "Is someone bothering you?" he asked one afternoon, stepping into the linen room where she stood folding towels. She hesitated, then finally whispered, "They think I'm using you." His face remained unreadable. "Let them," he said. "I don't care what they think." But she did. That night, Amara stood outside his study, heart heavy. "We need to stop," she said when he opened the door. "You're a billionaire, Zain. I'm just the help. You don't owe me anything." Zain stepped closer, closing the space between them. "I don't owe you," he said firmly. "I want you." She didn't sleep that night. She kept thinking about the kiss, the fire in his eyes, the way her name had sounded in his voice, about how fragile her place was in his world, and about the truth he still didn't know. If he ever found out her real name, who she truly was, everything would fall apart. Zain couldn't focus. He'd spent the past few days trying to bury himself in meetings, reports, even jogging through the estate grounds, but everything came back to Amara. Her voice, her scent, the way her hand trembled when he held it, the way she pulled away but didn't truly want to. He couldn't stop the questions spinning in his mind. Was he crossing a line? Was he fooling himself, imagining something deeper in her eyes? Or was he finally feeling something real for the first time in years? But just as he tried to quiet his thoughts, someone from his past came roaring back. In a whirlwind of perfume and high heels, Zain's ex-fiancée, Layla, stormed into the mansion unannounced. Drenched in diamonds and entitlement, she stood in the foyer like she owned the place. "I heard you've developed a taste for help," she said with a venom-laced smirk. Unseen, Amara stood just down the hallway, hidden in the shadows. She heard every word. Zain, cold and unmoved, dismissed Layla without ceremony. "This is not your home anymore," he said flatly. But the damage had been done. Amara retreated deeper into herself. She avoided Zain for days, returning to the bare minimum of duties. No eye contact, no conversation, no shared silences. She made herself invisible again. Zain noticed immediately. He searched for her one evening and finally found her in the greenhouse, watering plants long after sunset. The moonlight filtered in through the glass roof, casting shadows across her downturned face. "Don't disappear on me," he said quietly, stepping closer. Amara didn't look at him. "I don't belong in your world," she murmured. "Your ex is right. I'm just a maid. I don't even have a past that's worth sharing." Zain reached out, lifting her chin gently. "You think I care where you came from?" he asked. "I care about who you are now." She wanted to believe him, but the past has a cruel way of resurfacing. That same weekend, an unmarked envelope arrived under her door. No return address, just her full name, her real name, in precise, inked letters. Inside was an old photograph of her and her father standing together during better days. And a single note: "You can't run from your blood." Her hands trembled as she read it. Someone new, someone from the life she had abandoned, had found her. She burned the letter in the fireplace. But the fear it lit in her heart didn't fade. She had buried that life, the daughter of a disgraced tycoon, dragged through media trials and scandals, cast out of society overnight. She had chosen this anonymity, chosen sweat and silence over shame and headlines. And now it was back. That evening, as she stood in the dim hallway near the library, Zain approached her. "You're hiding something," he said gently, not accusing, just patient. "I'll wait until you're ready to tell me." The kindness in his voice cracked something open in her. He didn't push. Instead, he gave her space, real space. He stopped calling for her late at night, stopped brushing past her, not out of anger, out of respect. But the mansion felt colder without him. She missed the soft glances, the clumsy flirtation, the strange comfort she'd found in his presence. Her heart ached not from what he said, but from what he hadn't said in days. And all the while, shadows deepened. Mariah wasn't done. Her resentment had curdled into obsession. She dug deeper, hunting online forums, digging into archives, tracing whispers until she finally found it. An old article buried in digital dust. A photo of Amara as a teenager, standing beside her infamous father. She printed it, slid it anonymously onto Zain's desk. A betrayal wrapped in curiosity. Zain found the clipping later that night. He sat alone in his study for hours, staring at it. The resemblance was undeniable. The truth undeniable. But so was the ache in his chest. She had carried this pain alone, and never once used it to gain favor. Zain summoned Amara to the rooftop garden the next evening. The sun had just dipped beneath the horizon, casting a warm glow across the estate. He stood by the balcony rail, the clipping in his hand. When Amara stepped into the garden and saw what he was holding, her breath caught. "Is it true?" he asked, voice low. Tears welled up in her eyes as she gave a tiny nod. "That's why I work here," she whispered. "I couldn't face the world anymore." Zain stepped closer, lifting one hand to her cheek. "I don't care where you came from," he said softly. "You didn't choose your father's sins. I care about who you are now. I care about who I'm falling for." That broke her. She wept, not out of fear or shame, but from the sheer relief of being seen and still accepted. For the first time in years, she let someone witness all of her, and he didn't flinch. That night, she kissed him again, not with confusion, not in fear, but with the clarity of someone finally choosing to believe they were worthy of love. From that moment on, they stopped hiding. Zain began speaking to her openly in the dining hall. He no longer used pretense to keep her close. He simply welcomed her beside him. They walked the grounds together, talked during quiet mornings, laughed in front of others. The staff gossiped louder than ever, but Zain remained unbothered. He had made his choice. One morning, as they sat reviewing estate paperwork, Amara accidentally spilled coffee on his shirt. Flustered, she reached for a napkin. "I'll get a cloth." "Don't," he said gently, pulling her hand back. "Stay." And she did. They sat like that for hours, neither speaking, letting the silence hold them. It wasn't awkward. It was peaceful. And Amara realized she hadn't known peace like that in years. But peace never lingers in a story like theirs. Mariah was watching, still bitter, still burning, and then, finally caught. Zain had grown suspicious. Quietly, he ordered a review of the security cameras. It didn't take long to find what he was looking for. Mariah rifling through Amara's belongings, tampering with supplies, even watching them from hidden corners of the estate. The next morning, she was dismissed. No warnings, no second chances. She left the mansion in silence, but her glare lingered like venom in the air. Amara felt conflicted. I didn't want anyone to lose their job because of me, she said. But Zain was firm. She tried to destroy what matters to me. I won't tolerate that. His words stirred something deep within her. With Mariah gone, the atmosphere shifted again, this time lighter. They began having slow breakfasts together, took long walks after sunset. Sometimes they fell asleep together on the couch, curled under a blanket, watching black and white films. Amara's laugh returned. Her shoulders loosened. She no longer walked like she was trying to disappear. She felt seen, not just by Zain, but by herself. And then, one morning, he made a request that changed everything. I want you to come with me, he said over coffee. There's a private villa by the ocean. Just us. No staff. No whispers. Just peace. Amara hesitated. What will people say? Zain smiled. Let them say whatever they want. I'll only be listening to you. That weekend, they left the estate, just the two of them, in the back of a sleek black car, windows tinted, destination unknown. The villa was paradise. White sand, crystal waters, silence, no titles, no uniforms, no burdens. They spent the first day barefoot, walking along the shore. Zain cooked dinner and burned nearly everything, and they laughed so hard they cried. That night, beneath a blanket of stars, Zain turned to her. You changed me, Amara, he whispered. You reminded me what it means to feel again. Her eyes sparkled. And you made me believe I could be something more than my past. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Not a ring, but a necklace, delicate in gold, with a tiny silver key. This is the key to the study, he said, where I keep everything that matters. He pressed it in her palm. And now, that includes you. Returning to the mansion after the trip to the villa felt surreal. The once intimidating halls now felt like home, warmer, quieter in the best way. Amara wore the delicate key Zain had given her on a chain tucked beneath her blouse, resting close to her heart. It wasn't just jewelry. It was trust, freely given. Zain no longer kept her at a distance. He began bringing her into decisions. What art to hang, what colors to repaint the dining room, even the guest list for a private charity dinner. Slowly, what was once his home was becoming theirs. But such change never goes unnoticed. Zain's business associates started visiting more often, their curious glances barely veiled. Some whispered behind his back. One, braver than the rest, asked him bluntly, Is it true you're living with the maid now? Zain didn't respond. He simply walked away. But Amara noticed the tension it caused. Zain tried to protect her from the whispers, the judgment, but she saw it in the tightness around his eyes, in the way he clenched his jaw after meetings. She hated being the cause of it. If my presence affects your image, she said one night, her voice barely above a whisper, I can leave. But Zain stopped her mid-sentence. Your presence gives me peace, he said. Let them choke on their opinions. Days later, as she moved through the hallway dusting picture frames, she paused at the door to his private study, the one her key now unlocked. On impulse, she turned the knob and entered. She only meant to tidy up, but what she found made her breath catch. Inside a drawer was a stack of sketchbooks. She opened one and froze. Drawings. Dozens of them. Each one of her. Reading by the window. Laughing as she cleaned. Crying alone by the laundry room door. Moments she hadn't realized were seen, let alone remembered. Zain had been watching her far longer than she realized. And not in obsession, but in quiet admiration. He walked in and found her standing there, sketchbook in hand. You were my muse, he said softly, even before I admitted it to myself. Amara turned to him, heart full, and finally said the words she'd feared for so long. I love you. Zain didn't flinch. He stepped forward and pulled her close. And from that moment, something shifted again. He began inviting her to formal events, not as staff, but as his partner. She helped him plan meetings, reviewed contracts, even picked out ties. It wasn't about status. It was about building something real. But not everyone was willing to accept that. One afternoon, Zain's cousin, Victor, sharply dressed and full of venom, stormed into the mansion. "You're giving everything to a maid?" he barked. "Do you even hear how ridiculous that sounds?" Amara tried to quietly exit the room, but Zain held her hand tight. "She's worth more than anyone who judges her by her job," he said firmly. "If you can't respect her, you can leave." Victor stormed out, but his rage didn't end at the door. Behind the scenes, he began planting seeds of doubt. Whispers in the boardroom, twisted stories of Amara manipulating Zain, fake numbers and falsified concerns. His goal was clear: to force a wedge between Zain and his most trusted partners. Amara had no idea what was brewing. She was too caught up in the quiet moments: dinners on the terrace, stolen kisses in the study, late night dancing in the kitchen. Zain even asked her to move in officially, not as the maid, but as the woman he loved. "Will you be with me fully?" he asked under the glow of garden lanterns one evening. And she said yes, not just with her lips, but with her heart. She vowed to stop running, to face her past, to stand beside him, come what may. The staff cheered quietly. The mansion shimmered with joy. But far beyond the candlelight, Victor's storm was gathering strength. The air in the mansion was lighter than it had ever been. Laughter rang through the halls. Staff who once whispered now smiled when Amara passed. Her presence beside Zain no longer shocked. It was accepted, even respected by some. They had transformed the house into something more than a home. It was a sanctuary, a symbol of second chances. But while love bloomed within the walls, betrayal took root outside them. Victor made his move during a major board meeting. He presented altered financial reports, twisted internal memos, and forged emails. All pointed fingers at one person: Amara. "She's influencing Zain," Victor claimed, using her relationship to interfere in business. "She's a liability." Zain rose to defend her immediately. His voice thundered through the room. But the board was divided. Investors, nervous and easily swayed, demanded answers. Amara, hearing about the chaos too late, rushed to Zain's office. She saw the strain in his eyes, the lines on his face. He was torn between protecting her and preserving what he had built. "I'll leave," she whispered, "if it means saving your company. I won't let them destroy you because of me." But Zain stood tall, faced the board again, and declared, "If you force me to choose between a company and the woman who gave me back my life, I choose her." Silence fell across the room. Lines were drawn, loyalties tested. Zain handed over temporary control of the company to his closest and most trusted friend. He stepped back, refusing to play by their rules. Victor, thinking he had won, smiled smugly. But his arrogance was short-lived. Unbeknownst to him, Zain had planted a tiny recording device in the boardroom weeks earlier, suspecting treachery. And now, that device exposed everything. Victor's manipulation, his lies, even his private boasts about bringing the maid down. The fallout was swift. Victor was publicly humiliated and forcibly removed from every company tie he held. The board issued a formal apology. Investors begged for Zain's return. He did return, but only after one thing. After standing at his front door, arms open, where Amara waited. That night, there were no headlines, no press, just music in the kitchen, burnt toast, two people laughing until tears ran down their cheeks. "You saved me," Zain said, eyes glistening. "No," Amara replied, resting her head on his chest. "We saved each other." And just when she thought her heart couldn't take more, Zain did something unthinkable. He handed her a sealed envelope. Inside, a deed. Her name, her full name, on the title of a beautiful cottage outside the city. "It's yours," he said. "A place of your own. Somewhere safe. Somewhere you'll always belong." Amara stood stunned. "Why?" Zain's reply was simple. "Because love gives without needing a reason." That weekend, they visited the home. Together, they planted flowers in the garden. painted the walls in mismatched colors, watched sunsets from a porch swing that squeaked. No photographers, no servants, no wealth to define them. Just Zain, Amara, and a mop she joked about hanging in the hallway as a symbol of how far they'd come. Zain washed dishes, swept floors, tried, and failed to assemble furniture. And she laughed, really laughed, as if the pain of her past had finally been replaced by joy. Then, one quiet morning, Amara handed him a small velvet box. "I have something for you," she said. Inside was a silver pin, engraved with a single word, beginning. "Because that's what you were for me." He wore it every day, on his lapel, over his heart. Rumors eventually faded. Gossip died out. Because love this loud didn't need defending. Their life began to settle, not into routine, but into joy. Zain and Amara embraced every moment of normalcy. They shared late-night talks over mugs of tea, read side by side in bed, and debated which music to play during breakfast. The mansion, once shrouded in cold silence, now pulsed with laughter, warmth, and the rhythm of two hearts finally aligned. Then, Zain made a request that surprised Amara. "I want you to speak at the next private charity dinner," he said one afternoon. Her eyebrows shot up. "Speak? Me? Not about your past," he said, taking her hand. "About hope. About how beauty can rise from broken things. They need to hear it from you." She hesitated, not because she feared the guests, but because speaking her truth meant owning it, out loud, without apology. But Zain's belief in her never wavered. So on the night of the dinner, dressed in a flowing gown she designed herself, Amara stood beneath the soft glow of chandeliers and told her story. Not the sanitized version, the real one. She spoke of the night a man walked in on her in a hallway, how that silence, so awkward and shocking, shifted something she didn't understand at the time. How she had been a woman hiding in plain sight, burdened by shame, but slowly learning how to stand tall again. "I thought love was for people with clean slates," she said. "But I was wrong. It's for the broken, the scared, the healing. It's for all of us." The room went still. No one whispered. No one scoffed. There were glistening eyes, slow nods, and a quiet sense of reverence. And when Zain stepped forward, took her hand, and said, "This is the woman I love," she changed my world. The applause that followed wasn't for her beauty or her new life. It was for her truth. It was for them. After that night, something shifted again. Not between them, but around them. The world stopped seeing her as a maid who got lucky. They began seeing her as a woman who had risen with grace. And on the anniversary of the day they met, Zain had one more surprise. He brought her back to the same hallway where it all started, the one outside the guest room, where he had once walked in on her by accident. Only this time, the hallway was transformed. Candles lined the floor. Rose petals carpeted the tiles. And at the center, beneath a soft chandelier glow, Zain knelt on one knee. "That day changed everything," he said. "And every day since, I've loved you more." He opened a velvet box. "Amara, will you marry me?" Tears spilled down her cheeks. She nodded, unable to speak, then finally whispered, "Yes." The mansion that once echoed with judgment now erupted with cheers and celebration. There was no press, no paparazzi, just family, the staff who had watched them grow from cautious strangers to inseparable partners. Amara didn't wear diamonds at the wedding. She wore a cream dress she had stitched herself, simple but elegant. Zain wore the same navy suit from the boardroom meeting where he had chosen her over his empire. The garden was transformed into a glowing wonderland of fairy lights, soft jazz, and handmade decorations. Guests danced, laughed, cried. Even the old chef gave a teary toast. "She used to mop these floors," he said, raising a glass. "And now she's the queen of this house." When Zain kissed her beneath the stars, it wasn't for show. It was the final note in a love song no one had seen coming. The Maid and the Billionaire were no longer titles. They were simply Zain and Amara, two souls who had survived fire, shame, and doubt, and come out shining. A year passed. Seasons shifted. The world kept spinning. But inside the mansion, something beautiful had taken root. The halls no longer echoed with judgment. They danced with laughter, humming with new life and second chances. One quiet morning, Zain walked into the kitchen to the smell of sizzling plantains and the sound of soft humming. He paused in the doorway, watching Amara sway barefoot as she cooked, her hair tied up messily, her dress swishing gently as she moved. She turned around, a soft, mischievous smile playing on her lips. "I was going to surprise you later," she said, holding up a tiny, pale yellow onesie. "But now feels like the right time." Zain froze. His heart stopped. Then he ran to her, lifting her in his arms, spinning her around in joy. They laughed and cried, holding each other in the very kitchen where they once burned toast and whispered secrets. It was full circle. The same space that held their first breakfast now carried the promise of a new beginning. They began preparing not just for parenthood, but for a legacy built not on wealth, but on love. Zain insisted on being involved in everything: doctor's appointments, crib shopping, reading parenting books in bed with a highlighter in hand. At the same time, he also kept finding ways to make Amara feel seen. Flowers in her shoes, notes tucked in her pocket, sketches of her growing belly taped inside the study door. "I don't want to forget a single moment," he said. Their weekend cottage became a place of escape again. They painted a nursery overlooking the lake, planting lavender by the window. It wasn't just a room. It was a dream stitched with memories. Zain kept reminding her, "You made me more than a man. You made me a father." Amara's response never changed. She touched his cheek, smiled, and whispered, "We made each other better." Rumors tried to creep back in. Old colleagues, reporters sniffing around, tabloids fishing for stories. But none of it stuck. The power of their story had eclipsed scandal. The world had finally grown quiet. One afternoon, while sitting in the villa's garden, Zain looked over at her, a sketchpad in his lap. "I used to believe solitude was strength," he said. "That if I locked the world out, I wouldn't be hurt." He turned the sketchpad to her. On the page was a drawing of her standing by the sea, wind catching her dress, her hand resting on her belly. "But then you walked in," he said, "and you showed me that strength is letting someone in and staying." She took his hand and whispered, "And you showed me that love is worth the risk." Their home, once a fortress of privacy, had become a haven of healing. And though Amara never stopped being the woman who once scrubbed floors, she was now also the woman who stood beside a man rebuilt by her grace. The love they had grown wasn't loud. It didn't demand attention. It whispered in early morning snuggles, late night tea, in quiet gratitude that life had brought them together. They didn't just survive, they transformed, not because of what they had, but because of who they chose to become. Together, the sun was just beginning to rise, casting soft golden streaks across the mansion's garden. Inside, the nursery was filled with the sound of tiny breaths, barely their whispers of new life. Their daughter, Nyla, slept peacefully in a bassinet beside the bed, wrapped in a handmade blanket Amara had knitted during her final trimester. Zain sat nearby, gently rocking the bassinet with one hand and sketching with the other. He couldn't stop drawing her. Nyla's fingers, Amara's tired but glowing face, the way they both slept like the world outside no longer mattered. And maybe it didn't. Their story had begun with silence, an awkward encounter in a hallway, and ended in laughter, chaos, and the tiniest heartbeat between them. Or maybe it hadn't ended at all, because love like this didn't have an ending. One evening, as they walked the halls of the mansion, Amara paused at the same bathroom door that had changed everything. "You realize," she said, looking at Zain with a smile, "this hallway changed my life." Zain grinned. "Mine too." He bent down and kissed her forehead, then leaned in close. "I still remember how you looked, flustered, furious, beautiful." She laughed. "I thought you were going to fire me." Instead, he whispered, "I fell in love." Years passed, but the magic remained. Amara became more than a partner. She became a voice of compassion in Zain's world. She started a foundation for young women from troubled backgrounds. She gave speeches, mentored girls, and used her platform to show that resilience was more powerful than status. Zain stepped back from the corporate battlefield, investing instead in community, sustainability, and ethical growth. He became a different kind of billionaire, one defined not by his bank account, but by the peace in his home and the joy in his daughter's eyes. Their weekends were now filled with painting walls at the lake house, messy pancake breakfasts, Nyla's drawings pinned to every fridge surface, and the smell of jasmine Amara always insisted on planting by the windows. And every once in a while, they would return to the villa by the ocean, the place that had been their first escape. One night, under the same stars that had once witnessed their first vulnerable truths, Amara looked at Zain. "You ever think about how none of this was planned?" He smiled, pulling her closer. "The best things never are." She rested her head against his chest, their daughter sleeping soundly in the room behind them. They stood in silence, not needing words, because the truth was simple. She had once been the help. He had once been the recluse. But labels never stood a chance against destiny. They were a love story the world never saw coming. Proof that healing comes not in perfection, but in choosing each other again and again. And as the waves whispered their lullaby in the distance, Zain pressed a kiss to Amara's temple and whispered, "From the hallway to forever." And she answered, as she always did, with a smile that said everything, "Forever."